One of the things I've noticed is whenever we comment on Jim Cornette on Twitter, our interest level goes up tenfold. People like when we comment on it because we have a strange view. And by we, I mean the Wrestling Epicenter, which essentially, when it comes to the opinion part, at least the part that has the time to make the comments, is me, James Walsh. So I wanted to weigh in with a YouTube video and see if this got some interest as well from those who like when we comment on Twitter, and see if you guys like this video. And the question simply is this: does Jim Cornette, on the Jim Cornette Experience and Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru, give All Elite Wrestling a fair chance when he does his reviews? Now, I know a lot of All Elite Wrestling fans. By the way, I am one. There is nobody out there who champions All Elite Wrestling more than I do. I think it's the best chance we've had in a long time to have a viable alternative, dare I say, potential competitor to the WWE. Is it everything I'd want it to be if I was running it? Of course not. But I'm not running it, so it's not going to be. But it is a good show, and it has its elements that I enjoy, and I can overlook some of the ones that I don't enjoy. That is where Jim Cornette comes in. Jim Cornette comments on the things that are not perfect, that are not the things that I like with All Elite Wrestling, and by doing so has become public enemy number one. Now, the problem is, all criticism of things right now is seen as cancel culture. So anybody who says anything negative, the swarm is to defend that person for having that opinion and bashing the things they bash, or to just completely destroy that person. Jim Cornette, of course, made his comment about fried chicken in Ethiopia, and the cancel culture won, and they got him taken off of NWA Power. Officially, he resigned, but it seemed like it was heading towards the forward on that. It was going to happen, that he was going to be removed, because the NWA didn't want to deal with the headache of the cancel culture warriors, the all so easily offended Twitter, keyboard, cell phone warriors who just, and I'm going to say this too, you ever notice that the masters of race relations are white college entitled white kids who have Twitter? You guys are determining what is and isn't racist. How about we leave it up to those who actually are offended instead of these fake people? Anyway, snowflakes aside, I am an All Elite Wrestling fan, but I do make a point to listen to Jim Cornette's podcast, not just for the old stories, because the classic stories they're diamonds, they're gems, they're perfect. I do think maybe he discredits what the WWF was to wrestling, because he was with the competitor. I get that. Obviously he worked for WWF, but I'm talking about the 80s WWF and how it really changed wrestling. And obviously Jim was a part of the NWA, the opposing brand, so he's not going to sing that promotion's praises. But what are you going to do? Back on point, All Elite Wrestling is a good wrestling show. Jim Cornette does not like aspects of it, and here's what those aspects are. The style of wrestling is not what he likes, probably not exactly what I like. If you watch All Elite Wrestling, it is a whole lot like what was the WCW Cruiserweight division in the 90s, with guys doing spots, sometimes just for the sake of doing spots, and they don't always make sense. Sometimes they look like they're cooperating. It looks like a dance routine. All the things I said about, Lismark Jr. against Psychosis from Nitro in 1997 or 8 or whatever year it would have been. A lot of people were impressed by the athleticism and the high-flying aspect of it. And maybe I was a little too, but it's not what I like. And that is the quote that I'm going to throw back out here. The great Brian Last, the co-host, by the way, who does a fantastic job with Jim Cornette's podcast and the 605 Super Podcast, he said regarding one of the All Elite Wrestling women's matches, "Ugh, it's not what I like." Exactly. That is the part that needs to be understood when you listen to Jim Cornette and Brian Last review All Elite Wrestling. It isn't exactly to their liking. The steak is not prepared medium rare or whatever they requested. It's different. It's not exactly what they like. Cornette obviously would like a more Southern-style wrestling show. And to be perfectly honest, even though I'm from New Jersey originally and live in Arizona now, I liked Southern-style wrestling with a little bit of that cartoon aspect thrown in with the WWF. So that is the major problem that they have with the three guys that do that style the most, or the three most marquee guys that do that style. That, of course, being the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. They don't like that because of those styles. Of course, Jim had some experiences with them in private that, of course, also led to him not liking those guys, and especially Omega, I would say, with the foot injury, if you've ever heard him tell that story. That is what it comes down to. But if you strip it all down, if you peel back the layers of the onion, you will hear that there is criticism that is worth listening to, especially when it comes to things that do not involve those three people, Omega and the Young Bucks. His criticism is valid. He wants logic and logical booking involved in the show. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, wouldn't you want logical booking involved in the show? That's exactly what a show should be. Regardless if the wrestling is Bill Dundee versus Jerry Lawler, or if it is Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley. You want logic. I'll give you two examples of when he made the most amount of sense in terms of what he said. Of course, everything that he says is great. That gets overlooked. People don't talk about the fact that he said that Cody is killing it every week. That Jericho, except for maybe that one show when he had his father there, has killed it almost every time he's been on the show. Those things are not talked about. His praise of Jon Moxley, even though he doesn't like the hardcore style that he does, not talked about. They focus on the fact that he's critical of the Lucha Brothers, who honestly did struggle, especially at the beginning, maybe gotten a little bit more back on track now, to connect with that American audience because they were still doing lucha. And whether we want to admit this or not, whether we want to pretend that the internet has taken down borders and barriers, different countries do have different styles. Americans expect a certain style, and if that's not the style that's done in an American ring, we're going to struggle to adapt to it and to accept it. And that's what happened with the Lucha Brothers. Speaking of barriers not really being broken down, all you need to do is look at the women's division. Their major criticism is of the women's division, and they're absolutely right. The Japanese talent, namely Riho and Emi Sakura and whatever the girl's name is who dresses like Freddie Mercury for some reason that we've never been explained, always beat the American talent. That's going to piss off an American audience. It's not just about patriotism. I'm not just talking about flag waving and things like that. We can't connect to people who don't speak our language. They can't cut promos. They can't understand promos. You can't have an exchange backstage with them. Otherwise, you have what happened the other week, where Britt Baker's cutting a promo turning heel, essentially, because they've killed her as a face because she never could win the matches over these Japanese talents. They killed her as a face, so she's better turn heel. She cuts a promo on Riho, and you have Michael Nakazawa trying to explain it to her. It just comes off bad. Ring of Honor was guilty of this at all times. I remember there was a time they had a Japanese champion who didn't speak English, and they had him cut a promo backstage and didn't even subtitle it. Can you say pretentious? The bottom line is, if you listen to their criticism of All Elite Wrestling, there is valid things to be heard. Do not assume just because the Mud Show outlaw stuff that he says is so prevalent, and the Kenny Oliviers and the Bald Bucks and the things that he says, the rhetoric, if you will, you gotta peel that back. If you can deal with listening to it and not get your skin crawling and get all huffy and go on Twitter and say, fuck Jim Cornette, If you can deal with things, deal with life, not go into a safe space with your safety pins on, there's logical things that are said that actually would benefit the company, AEW that is, to listen to. He's not a fool. The man has got a career that goes longer than most of us, including myself, have been alive. Not by much. I'm 38, so he's only got me beat by a couple years, his career, that is. But people have got to stop the ignorance of, oh, he's critical of these guys and I don't want to hear what he has to say. Everything he says is stupid. It's not. Give it a chance. You might learn something. And that's my 2 cents.